I don't know exactly where to start, but years after this incident, I had a flashback with all the details while talking to my girlfriend on the phone and telling each other our memories. After hours of reading people's memories on Reddit, I have something to share and I can't wait to see your reactions. This happened at the beginning of 2023. I am male and 22 at the time, was working as a terminal attendant at one of the biggest airports in Europe. My job description was mostly to give directions to arriving and departing passengers in this airport, as big as a city, to solve their problems, to solve visa and passport related problems. For some reasons I can't tell you exactly which airport it is, but you can probably guess from the details I will give. Since the airport is really huge and in a very key location, it is one of the transfer points for passengers coming and going from Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. So it was in the nature of my job to encounter very strange types of people and events. I was working 12-hour shifts, some days at night and some days during the day, and the area I was working in was determined by daily assignments. This incident happened during my 12-hour night shift on the transfer floor of the airport, the common point where international passengers wait for passport control before picking up their luggage, and where the passengers of all incoming international flights flow. Actually, when we work, we are supposed to wait at a fixed point when passengers don't specifically call for us. But it was 3 o'clock at night, and since flights and passenger traffic slowed down at this time of night, I decided to patrol around a bit. I left my station and went to the gate of the only arrival flight at that time of night. I decided to wait there in case passengers needed help when the gate opened. After a while, the plane pulled up to the gate opened and a lot of normal-looking people walked out of the gate and into the transfer center. Except that woman. That strange-looking woman who made me feel cursed by the cold January air. She was a brunette in her late 20s, covered in dirt and torn clothes. Her hair was missing in some places, and the hair that was there was rather unkempt and I think a bit burnt. When she saw me in my uniform with unusually large pupils, she walked up to me looking scared and confused. "Excuse me, do you work here? I need help." Damn it, of course you need help. I wanted to take her arm because she was having trouble walking, but the smell emanating from her, don't judge, it wasn't a normal sweat smell, but it smelled like she was already dead, made my nose hurt and I immediately abandoned the idea. I sat her down on a seat reserved for passengers and I stood opposite her and asked her in a calm voice how I could help her. I had a very bad experience. That's why I'm running away from there. I haven't eaten for days and I think there was something in the water they gave me on the plane. Since I drank it, I don't feel well and my mind is fuzzy. I didn't find what she was saying convincing. I thought she was in some kind of mental breakdown because her gestures and intonations when she spoke were very strange. But I was also familiar with the aviation rules, and I knew that something like this should be reported immediately to the police. When I told her this, she didn't like the idea and she stood up and shook me by the shoulders and shouted, "No police, never the police!" Dude. She started laughing, looking up at the ceiling like there was something up there. The woman was making strange gestures with her hands, but her cheerful demeanor was broken by a sudden burst of crying. "No police, they won't like it. The police, that's their job. Who said anything about cops? I'm talking about the people who did this to me." As she said this, she lifted up the burnt hair that had fallen on her forehead, and I saw one of the strangest things I've ever seen in my life. Look, I've seen a lot of strange tattoos because of the environment I studied and lived in, but this was different. Right in the center of her forehead was a tattoo that looked like the barcodes on the products in the grocery store with some numbers underneath. At first, I thought it was just a strange fashion sense for aesthetic purposes, but her strange behavior in some documentaries I had seen made me think that it was probably used by human traffickers to mark people so that they could be easily identified and caught when they escaped. When she realized that I couldn't help her the way she wanted, she at least wanted to use my phone. But I told her that she was not allowed to use my phone due to the airport's security rules, and that she could use the pay phones if she wanted to. Of course, she didn't have any money with her, and I was also not allowed to give her any money, since she showed aggressive behavior towards me every time I insisted on talking to the police. I finally decided to do it secretly and brought her some food and water before going to the police. When I arrived at the police station on the transfer floor, the policemen were taking advantage of the calm of the night to rest. When I told them what had happened to me and pointed to the woman, they told me that she was just one of the refugees coming into our country. My country hosts so many illegal immigrants and refugees. It is normal for them to think like that, and that she was acting like that because she wanted us to let her enter illegally. They didn't take it very seriously, and unfortunately I had to leave without any solution. When I went back to the woman, I realized that she had not touched the food and water I had brought her and repeatedly refused to consume them with a fear in her eyes. I decided to have a conversation with the woman so as not to be too judgmental. When I asked her name, she gave me a very strange answer that I had never heard before. It was like a name from some ancient language, and even now I don't remember exactly what she said. When I asked her where she came from and where she was going, she said she didn't know. To get this information, I took her passport and her boarding pass from her hand. I don't remember exactly, but she was coming from an Asian country and her next destination was not written on the boarding pass, so her ticket was valid only until here. I decided to end our conversation, which was not very productive, and leave her alone to observe from a distance. I had to go back to my station for some paperwork, and decided to take care of it in the meantime. Later that night, around 6 a.m., my other colleague was due to arrive at the station to hand in my shift. I was going to exit through the door where they were going to enter the transfer center where we were, and before I left, I decided to stop by again on my way to see this strange female visitor. When I went up to her, she was holding a book in her hand. It was a book with old covers and yellowed paper, but I didn't understand what was written in it until she pointed at me and called me over. Even then, I didn't understand it. It was a book written in an alphabet I didn't know, in a language I didn't know, and I don't want you to think I was making it up, but it was a book with strange figures of people and other drawings. The woman pointed to one of the drawings and said, "This is how they do this. They do it like this. I'm confused. Can you be a bit more specific?" When I said that, she shook her head from side to side, laughing. She had an expression as if I wouldn't understand even if she explained it. I told her that a friend of mine would be arriving soon in my place, and that if she had any problems or needs, she could contact them as she wished. I gave her directions to the restroom, where she could get food, the police station, and the ticket office. After a few seconds of looking at my face, she thanked me in tears and took my hand in both of hers and looked me in the eyes. I didn't know exactly what had happened to her, but at that moment my heart broke and I put my other hand over hers and nodded. It was time to leave when my friend who was coming behind me to take my place touched me, and I introduced them to the woman and secretly informed about the situation. My friend told me that they were going to take special care of her, said goodbye, and I finished my shift for the day. When I woke up the next day, I texted my friend and asked them how she was doing. They told me that after I introduced them to her, they left to take care of another passenger and that they never saw her for the rest of the day. They said that when they asked the passport police and ticket offices, they told them that they were busy enough as it was and that they didn't pay that much attention to people and brushed him off. I never saw this woman on my next shifts and I never heard from her again. Still gives me goosebumps when I remember it. I would be interested in your comments on the incident. If there is anything I missed or you want to ask, let's meet in the comments. Thank you for reading. About 3 years ago, I, a 21-year-old female, was a waitress during the height of COVID. It was my first ever job, and I remember being so excited to start as soon as possible. After all my training was finished and I got my certifications, I was put on the closing shift. We closed at 10 p.m. every night at the time, and typically it was just my cook, a guy in his 20s, and I. Rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I liked it that way. I always worked better alone, and I didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyway, so it was nice. I can remember it was near the end of my time there that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstance I did at the time. I never could really trust my gut very much because I had mild anxiety and couldn't tell if what I felt half the time was valid or not. I mention this because when all this went down, it felt real, and I had an absolute feeling. I had started my shift that evening around 3 p.m. I said goodbye to the last waitress and I was on my own with my cook. Everything was pretty slow and normal until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. After a little debating, she finally decided to sit in and eat instead. I'd say around 10 or 20 minutes later is when I spotted an older-looking car pull up, and 3 people came out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s to 40s. I could tell it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed it by asking since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something much more sinister later on. Her attitude toward me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I sat them at a booth and took their orders. I noticed they had a red binder and a black pen. Remember this. I then went to tend to my other customers as there were a couple other tables I was waiting on. Once I brought their food out to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I found this to be normal as this being the tourist vacation state it is. It wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes. I would say this was reasonable for me to assume it was nothing, if they didn't already look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number to a realtor I knew closely and well since I often went to church with her. There wasn't any other notable interactions I really had, aside from occasional small talk, if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. It was around 4:30 p.m. now, and they were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you were in the food industry, you know that as a server you don't really get breaks, just a lunch most of the time, and sometimes not even that if it's super busy all day. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. This is important. Now, I didn't really notice it at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp, down near the end, and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing, about 5 feet below but in front of me. We were having some small talk, and they started to ask some personal questions such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things wasn't a good idea. However, this for some reason was starting to raise some red flags. I gave very vague answers to all her questions as best as I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work, whether or not I said no. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her point. She had told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless, I would have said no. However, what she said next solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said she needed pretty and young girls like me, that she had 10 girls now as it was, and she wanted to expand. She mentioned how they get paid $30K. She didn't specify the time length, and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help her with her business. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid business and I was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, that I was satisfied working for my boss. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said she'd show me a picture of her van in her car, but her phone was in her hands. I knew for certain I wasn't going anywhere with her or near that car. I declined yet again and said that I was fine right where I was. I said she could show me on her phone instead, but she was hesitant. After which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the 2 men. A little shaken, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I had just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with them, because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have. I laughed with him. At the end of that night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned the weird interaction. A panicked look came over her and she sat silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. That's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me that I was almost trafficked, and I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped and I started to panic at the realization of just how much danger I was in. Nothing really happened after that, except for the red binder and the black pen I told you to remember. I went to work the next day and a customer walked in. Now, normally in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly there to just eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. Well, I get into my apron and sit this gentleman. He was well dressed, not in a suit and tie, but just nicely dressed. He was alone. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of one single coffee. He had a red binder and black pen with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more that he proceeded to sit there for 3 hours, watching me as I tended to my tables. I kept asking him if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat and relaxed with coffee. I sorta shrugged and said no, not here. Now this might come as a surprise to some of you, but servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some of your conversations. I'm lucky I did with this one. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how he was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told my cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. It worked, I think. He ended up leaving not long after that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I'll tell you though, I've been much more on guard since then. In summary, I was almost human trafficked and didn't know it. Thanks to some gut feelings, I wound up as one of the lucky ones. No, I wasn't able to report them because their car was facing forward toward the building's cameras, and we couldn't see the license plate. Yes, I told my manager, and he never allowed any of the servers to leave the building without someone else walking them out. I made it known throughout the whole staff about what happened since I didn't want any of them to get hurt. I used this story as a way to tell others to please be safe and be aware of your surroundings. I didn't think this could happen to me. It can happen to anyone. Be safe and be observant.